You know, often, what makes you happy in a moment is very different to what gives your life meaning. And what gives my life meaning is this exploration of belonging and being a parent. What makes me happy is usually just relaxing or gardening or reading or something.
Welcome to Women We Should Know with international speaker, mindset reset mentor, author, and your host, Leslie Michaels. With audacious honesty and candor, the Women We Should Know podcast presents the wisdom and life-empowering insights of women who are the embodiments of innovation and social evolution. Please join Leslie as she shares potent conversations that will inspire your personal and professional evolutions. Welcome back to Women We Should Know. I am always so happy to introduce each of you to a new guest, to a new episode. Women We Should Know was founded on the desire and the impetus to have conversations, real meaty conversations with women who are audacious and courageous and absolutely do not color inside the lines. These are the these are the women who are out there making big differences. And it came to my attention as I was speaking with so many of them in my life that too many of them, their names are not known, and they should be, because these are women that will inspire you, that you will gain extra impetus from, gain nuggets of wisdom from. And we have just such a woman today, let me tell you. Anna McAfee is a community curator, LinkedIn trainer, and author, and she is driven to help individuals and businesses build better and more authentic, this is the key with Anna, more authentic connections in our digital world and in our real lives. This thirst for deeper connection is what inspired her to build the hashtag LinkedIn Local, a digital movement that inspired people around the world to take their online chats offline, to leave their sales pitches at home, oh, hallelujah, and just connect in an authentic way in the real world. Now, Anna's in Australia, so she set this up there. It spread from Australia to New Zealand to India, across the United States, and over the short period of 22 months, the hashtag LinkedIn Local movement inspired professionals. I'm having a little trouble with my words today, women. Just hang in there with me. We'll get there. Inspired professionals from 92 countries to step out from behind their laptops and take an interest in their neighbors. Hashtag LinkedIn Local has since been validated by LinkedIn itself. That's a huge accomplishment. So I am really excited to introduce you to this woman and to have a conversation with this woman about ways that we can all begin connecting more authentically and more broadly and color outside the lines.
Hi, Leslie. It's great to be here. And thank you for that very kind introduction.
You are so welcome. And it is so deserved. And thank you for working to help me figure out a way where our calendars on different days, we're even in different days of the week, not just different times of the day, could congeal so we could do this, because I'm very excited to have all of Women We Should Know's listeners be inspired by you. But before we really get rolling, I have this little tradition. It's just my little fun tradition. In the beginning, I like to ask every guest, what is not on your bio that you would like people to know about you?
That is an interesting one. Look, I think probably the thing that occupies my time the most are my two children, who are 6 and 8. And right about the time I was building LinkedIn Local, I had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old.
Oh my gosh.
And let's just say I burnt out. That's a whole other story. But there's the caregiver burnout and there's the community builders burnout. So mental health is very close to my heart. But yes, the bit that's not on my bio is probably my children, who drive me and challenge me every day.
As they should. That is their job. Good for you. And thank you for sharing. Well, let's just dive into this. You built hashtag LinkedIn Local. You are involved in bespoke films, creating films. You are looking to partner in new ways around the world to create community. I'm going to say, let's start with hashtag LinkedIn Local, because it seems to me that's where it started. Is that correct?
It is, yes. My background, I mean, I've always been a big LinkedIn fan. I came from the recruitment industry. I was a trainer in that industry. And so I used to train people on LinkedIn, and I have done that for years, long before LinkedIn Local. And so it came about that I very much, I mean, I grew up here in Australia. I lived in Scotland for almost 10 years and then came back to Australia, back to my hometown, which was not part of my life's plan, I must admit, but a good decision all the same. And I was connecting people. I was just doing local searches and connecting with people on LinkedIn, as you do when you're on LinkedIn. And so I had a few coffee catch-ups with people that I'd met on there, and it was just such an interesting group of people. And I pulled some statistics from LinkedIn Sales Navigator account about local engagement, which was extremely low in a regional city of around about 70,000 people. And so I put up a post about it, and someone said, well, if there's so few of us, why don't we all meet up? I thought, great, this is a wonderful idea. And so that was what happened. 2 weeks later, I put up a post and said, I'm going to host a LinkedIn Local meetup. Who wants to come? And I put a hashtag at the end of it, long before hashtags were a thing on LinkedIn, because I just thought, oh, well, hashtags encourage participation. Why not?
Sure.
And sure enough, within a few hours, there was 3 other cities around the world saying, I'm going to do this as well. And then over the course of a few months, just this huge outpouring of people from our news feeds and our networks just saying, I want to do this in my city. Will you help me? And I think that was the key point. People wanted help. They didn't just want to say, oh, I'm going to do this. They saw what we were doing and thought, I want to replicate that. That looks really fun. That looks not like the networking events that are in my city.
Right.
This looks like something I want to go to. So how do I create it? So that was our big thing. It was about these events that we were running. These meetups were about building community. And there were our core purpose was to get to know the people behind the LinkedIn profiles. And and I think that resonated just with so many people. It's like we're all this shiny, polished version of ourselves online, particularly on LinkedIn, I think. But there are actually real people behind those. And so that was really where the idea came from. And it's so simple. And I mean, I just adored seeing this everywhere it went, and the mentoring part of it. It was, and so from that point on, I really got into the whole art and science and theory behind community. And I do some consulting on that now.
Well, obviously you have, at least on this occasion, hopefully on more occasions, a sense of timing of when something is just ready. Because
Absolutely.
It mushroomed quickly, 22 months into 92 cities in around the world in 22 months.
It did. And we started with, oh, well, people wanted help. Let's hop on a Zoom call. And then it became apparent, well, I'm getting 6 of these requests a week. Why don't we just have one Zoom call with a lot of people on it? And so we started, and then it just became this, well, we needed a website to have a guide for people, so people knew what it was and what we were doing. And then we put a booking system on the website, and it just crashed. It was just, I would get messages from people saying, I've tried to book a call on the website, and there's nothing for 60 days. Like, surely I can get on before then. And we were just like, I mean, talk about validating idea just with a very simple website. It just completely, I think it gave some legitimacy to what was and is still to this day a entirely user-driven movement.
Mm-hmm.
It's in no way connected with LinkedIn, the organization. It's entirely user-driven.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what does it mean to be in no way affiliated with LinkedIn, entirely user-driven, and yet, what is it? Validated by LinkedIn?
Yeah, so there are now terms under the LinkedIn help section that if you want to host a LinkedIn local meetup, these are the rules under which you can do so. And here's a guide in order to get started. So, so it very much became we ran it for almost 2 years. And in that second year, we had a lot of discussions with LinkedIn's head office around how they could support our community, which was entirely not for profit. It was an all volunteer movement. We were very clear at the outset that people needed to not be making money from the idea because it had LinkedIn's name on it. So, and our intention was to always work with them. There was never a sense of we're setting this up as something that they shouldn't know about and we're making a ton of money off this. That wasn't the purpose.
Right. You were co-opting LinkedIn.
No, not at all. It was just a meetup of LinkedIn users. So, and it was never intentionally meant to be as big. So of course there became a bit of a gray legal area when so much of this is happening. So for a long time, we weren't able to use the LinkedIn logo because obviously that has a trademark on it. So the whole validation side came after several months of calls with one of their marketing teams. And they gave they produced a logo with LinkedIn and then local at the end of it. And they produced a guide, which meant any LinkedIn user, wherever you are, was able to host a LinkedIn local meetup. And there's some very simple guidelines around that. So it's now a part of LinkedIn. Unfortunately, I think for me, the experience was somewhat bittersweet because we had it validated, but it meant that there was no need for what we ran, which was a host community and a whole mentoring process. We were very values driven. We had some core values around diversity, authenticity, respect, and being open and available to all LinkedIn users in terms of the events themselves. But collaboration was really key. So the way we'd structured our community and the way we structured our mentoring process was really to get people in the same city to work together. Be that Toronto is probably a great example because I think they had 6 different groups throughout the city. They were just different parts of the city. So there was one downtown, there was North York, there was Etobicoke, there was lots of different areas, and there was some special interest areas in that as well.
And this is Toronto, Canada.
Yeah, Toronto, Canada. And so they had a really special group, which I think still continues to this day. The pandemic's been a little bit tricky for a lot of groups, but, which is newcomers to Canada. So it's welcoming new migrants to the city, getting them connected.
That's lovely.
Job opportunities. Yeah, like really fantastic. And this is, I guess, the whole idea about taking the sales pitches out of it. When you make that point, what else do you build? And there's been some really wonderful examples, and I detail a lot of that in my book as to what the charity partnerships. Baltimore in Maryland have raised, I think, $30,000 for living classrooms throughout their tenure over the last few years.
Beautiful.
And so it's produced some really wonderful things. But the bittersweet part was that LinkedIn, when they validated it, they stripped it of its values, and it meant there was no host community. So people still come to me and say,
so they validated it, but not really.
Not really. Well, they did. they validated the name and the use of the legal part.
Right. But not the actual
that suited them. Yes, but not
the heart.
No, not its heart. Yes.
They stripped the heart of it, is what it sounds like.
Yes, they did. And so since then I have obviously had to take a broader view about community, and that's where my passion really lies. And so I, help groups in different pockets of people, and explore some diverse ideas around belonging, and that's where very much my passion lies. But it began with LinkedIn Local, and having said that, I still run my LinkedIn Local group in Coffs Harbour, where I live in Australia. So I still have an ongoing group that we meet up. That's been a little bit, we met 4 times last year, and probably 3 or 4 times in 2020. So yeah.
Not bad considering we've been in a global pandemic.
Exactly. And we'll continue that into 2022. So, so I still host my own, and I'm still very connected to a lot of people that I met through our host community, but I don't sit above it or sit across it anymore.
So when you say you still have many connections, does this mean worldwide they're still calling and saying that's
well,
beautiful?
Not calling, it's more friendships, I would say, of some of our Canadian hosts, some of our French hosts, some of the African hosts.
Wonderful. Yeah. Now, your book, How a Hashtag Changed the World. Tell us what a person is going to experience from that. Are they going to learn a little bit about how to set up these type of local communities, or is it, what is it, Anna? What is it? Tell us about it.
If people want to set them up, yes, they will learn a bit about that. But this isn't a how-to book. This is a storytelling book. This is the story of what happened. It's the story of how a group of, I guess, thoughtful, community-minded people use social media for good. And there are around 60 stories in the book, from just small snippets of how that particular community impacted individuals. So they're very much stories of people who have been socially isolated, who have found a group of people that they felt like they belonged with, people who've had huge career pivots after getting involved in their local community, LinkedIn Local communities in the city, as well as the social impact side. So the charity partnerships, Baltimore is mentioned, as I said, the Newcomers to Canada is mentioned, and a number of other groups throughout the world who, just with this tiny, simple idea, establishing a set of values and working together, actually effectively created change. So it's really for people who love stories. It's for people who love social impact. It very much fits in with, I don't know if you've seen the Netflix documentary series, The Social Dilemma.
Not yet. It's on my wish list. I haven't gotten to it.
It doesn't have the same ideas, but it would complement that. Anyone who's a little bit scared about the whole social media world, this is an example of what you can do with social media for good. And I think, and there's a lot of different stories. I mean, there's stories from all over the world, as I said, India, Africa, France, Australia, there, US, Canada. There are stories from, all pockets of the globe, but just about a very simple human idea in one community.
Maybe there are others out there like me, but I actually often learn more from stories than someone telling me how to. Here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3. By the time I get to step 3, I'm bored, I'm off something shiny and I'm off somewhere else. But a story will captivate my imagination and let me put myself in that situation and then extrapolate from there.
Absolutely. And I think as well, how to, particularly in written format, has had its time. I think we've very much moved on to video content from that type of thing. And funnily enough, I'm working on a LinkedIn learning course right now for building local chapter-based communities. So by the time any of your listeners of listening or watching, that may well be out. But yes, it's a quick, short video series. And I think in a lot of ways, that's how a lot of people learn. Whereas stories, I think, are still wanting to be consumed in all types of different ways and formats.
Yes.
And I think for us who were just so passionate about LinkedIn Local, because I have a co-author with the book who was someone very, not one of the co-founders, but someone, Nicole Johnson, who is very central to the communication side of the community. She helped us a lot internally. So her and I co-wrote the book together, and we were both just deeply passionate about telling that story. And it was hard to release a book in the middle of a pandemic about offline connection.
Right.
But I think it really has a time and a place, and particularly our emergence from this world of not being so connected,
Right.
particularly in a real life world.
Right.
I think it's an interesting blueprint for other communities to look at and go, well, hang on a minute, what did they do? How is it so impactful? You know, what, and I know myself, back in 2017 and 2018, the number of people who would just inbox me constantly and say, I work from home. I don't have any sort of like social connection in my area. I just love this idea. Or I went to a LinkedIn Local and it just completely changed my idea around what networking can be or what community is. And I feel really supported by this group. And I saw that in 2017 and 2018. I can only imagine how people are feeling now.
Right.
With those ideas. And so it's very much the online to offline idea is very much its time has come now as we reemerge from this pandemic.
Right.
So for anyone who's sort of interested in those ideas, I guess the book will definitely spark some ideas around what's possible for that.
And when will your video series be out? What's your target date?
Look, it's all up to LinkedIn Learning. So it's based within the LinkedIn platform. So I believe it will be Q1 2022, but towards the end. So it's being recorded in January. Obviously, it then goes to the editors and all the rest.
Right. So everyone out there listening,
I would say March.
Yes.
March. There is, I mean, for anyone who is listening before March, there is a short video series, a free LinkedIn Local course that I put up. If you just got, probably the best thing to do is go to the LinkedIn Local page on LinkedIn. And it is actually the pinned post at the top, or message me and I'll send you the link. But there is a free specifically around LinkedIn Local. The LinkedIn Learning one is going to be developing a local chapter-based community. So that could be a sustainability group. It could be a Women We Should Know group. It could be, something that's very specific to you want to do in your local area.
Right.
So that's the focus. So it's not just LinkedIn Local, but there is a short LinkedIn Local course. Admittedly, it is probably coming up to about 2 years since it was recorded though. So, but it's a free resource for anyone who's interested.
Something I'd be interested in knowing, and not in exact figures, but how did you see this playing out in terms of participation percentages of male and female?
I think it was very much 50-50. It was very across the board. There were a few LinkedIn Local women groups. There was certainly one in London, in England. I know there was one in India as well. So there were a few that wanted to do that whole idea. So women on LinkedIn getting offline. We encouraged people to think more diverse than that. But obviously London at that point had, I think, 5 or 6 groups already. So it made sense that if somebody wanted to do a LinkedIn Local Women, that it could be, because there were other options for other people.
Right. Make themselves unique in that way.
And the other thing that we really encouraged, which did actually happen for a few groups, who said, look, we want a women-only group. And we said, well, that's good, but there isn't really one in your city yet, and we're all about diversity. So why don't you create some topics or panel discussions around women in leadership, around, I know India had one about a discussion panel around getting women back into the workforce in India. Which I know was really interesting. And the feedback I actually got from those hosts when we did say, don't make it exclusive, but your topic will attract the people that you want to be there.
Mhm.
What happened was, and I actually think this was in Lima in Peru, the host actually came back to me and said, do you know what? We had a lot of quite senior men come who were so supportive of women participation in the workforce or women in leadership. And it actually created a whole new perspective
Mhm.
for that particular topic. And I
Mhm.
think that's really interesting is, yes, we need equality, and yes, there is a lot of shift that needs to happen, but men actually do need to be a part of that conversation. Excluding them out isn't always the best thing to do. Sometimes it is when you need safe spaces, but
That's right.
I've seen it work in both ways. So
Well, and men will benefit, children will benefit, families will benefit, countries will benefit, everyone will benefit from equality and equity. I asked because it's known statistically that men are more successful at networking than women, because women are more empathy based and men are more what do they call it in the psychological terms, but it's more particular accomplishment based, and women move from empathy, men, let's get it done. And so I think it's fascinating that you had this balance, because I know there are men out there who are embracing and supporting women's equality and women's equity. So I could see where this type of event that you've put together would actually let everybody come together because of your diversity aspect on equal ground and be sharing and be supportive of everyone in the group.
It's such a interesting study, I think, for me. And I realized very early on, just through my own local gatherings here in Australia, when the name LinkedIn is on it. And I'm the first to admit that the name LinkedIn on it really did help the movement.
Oh, of course.
If we had called it something else, there's no way.
Instant credibility.
Instant credibility. But I also think there's an identification. Oh, well, I'm on LinkedIn, so that's relevant to me.
Right.
And I had a lot of people turning up to events who I thought, oh, I really should start a LinkedIn profile, but don't actually have one. Can I still come? Like, of course you can. They knew what to expect though with that there. So I think it very much did level the playing field.
Sure.
In that sense, in terms of, it's not an exclusive thing. It's I'm on LinkedIn. This is, my audience is on LinkedIn, so therefore this is relevant to me.
Right.
But I also think that, and this is the other thing we forget with networking that I really encouraged people when they were setting up. And one of the reasons I think some cities were just so successful with it is that not everyone on LinkedIn is there to sell. You have HR managers, you have executive assistants, you have job seekers.
Right.
So going to a very pitchy networking event where you have to get up and say what you do is not appealing to them in any way, shape, or form, because they don't have to pitch at any point in their current job.
Right.
Job seekers definitely don't want to be standing up and saying what they want to do, what they do for a living. Unless they're particularly, unless they've got a clear thing in mind that they know. And not all job seekers have that. So we very much said to hosts, you need to design events and experiences around the non-selling idea, because probably most of the people on LinkedIn are there just to have conversations. They're here to share ideas. They're here to get some inspiration for certain aspects. And so it's not actually just always about those that are in business development roles. I'm curious, and I that idea still continues to fascinate me, because that's how we created community and communities was through this idea that actually, and this I think is what's inherently wrong with a lot of networking, is that it's hard work. You've got to practice your pitch. It's very hard to put yourself out there. Whereas in the whole idea of LinkedIn Local was to just come along and
Mhm.
just go, hey. And there was a lovely story around, one of our hosts gave us about someone in Texas who had actually been to the Fort Worth event, they'd been to the Dallas event, they'd been to the Austin event, and this guy just kept coming up at all these events, this young guy. And Matt said to me, he said, I spoke to him and I said, gosh, you know, I've seen you at all these events. It's great that you're coming to all of them. Because Matt was often speaking at them. And this guy said to him, I'm trying to get better at putting myself out there. And I feel really comfortable in these particular spaces because I feel like I'm learning. I feel like I'm not being judged. I feel like I can just come along and just have conversations and not really feel like I'm inferior or anything
Right.
to what I feel at other types of events. And I just think that insight is just so interesting because we forget that, you know, a lot of networking is designed for business development, and that is fabulous.
Yes.
But I think, you know, in terms of the whole purpose of why a community, well, specific communities exist, isn't actually around that idea.
You do explore the idea of community at great depth and breadth. And one of the topics that you speak to that I find fascinating and suspect our listeners will as well is not just how to build a community, but how to show up in community and be a supportive, contributing member in community.
Yeah, and it's something that particularly 2021, just this past year, this idea is really starting to feed in because I guess from my own personal perspective, I've been there, I've built a community, I burnt out. You know, when LinkedIn issued our terms, I was partly devastated and partly just relieved because I just was like, I actually just can't continue doing this anymore. I wasn't being paid for it. It was just a kind of, it was just getting so big and so fast, and we just didn't know how to support it. And so with the resources that we had, which were none. And so I've often thought, well, do I go back and build another big community? Like what? And often people say, well, would you do it again? And I'm not sure that I would. What I'm really interested in is what I love is the community I get from showing up in other people's and actively contributing. And the whole premise that underlies community building. And I will quote this from, there's a podcast, which I don't think exists anymore, called Get Together, but they have this beautiful phrase, which is communities feel magical, but they don't come together by magic. And one of the magical things behind community building is actually finding those first followers or those early adopters and building the community with them. So being one of those people, not just the leader, ultimately helps. And this is what we did with our hosts. I mean, we were just encouraging other leaders. And so my whole idea around how you show up in community is, it is about joining, having those active conversations without actually needing to build one your own. You can very much become a leader in that space. And we did this with LinkedIn Local a lot. When someone would say, oh, well, I'm in Chicago. Is there one here in my city already? And because I want to start one. And we'd say, well, why don't you just connect with the existing group, go along to their event, ask them if they need any help. And invariably that would result in fantastic friendships and fantastic collaborations. And I feel like there's so many, let's build a community, let's build a community, let's build a community. In the end, we don't need so many empty community spaces. What we need is thriving ones. So perhaps a conversation, and what I'm really focused on right now is how we shift it into how we show up in communities better, how we show up in our local communities better, how we show up in our online communities better, contribute, be a part of the conversation there. And from that, you get the magical part of communities without actually all the groundwork and stress to get there.
Yes. And there's this element that I've often seen overlooked in the rush to build communities, which is that we're different people. We're all different people. And there are people who don't want to lead. They want to be supportive. And there are people who just want to be dropper-inners every once in a while. And there are people who they will be devoted. They will be there every week. They will contribute their energy and their voices, but that's it. And so to create community like you did organically, it creates space for all of these different individuals to come as themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that ability to just show up as who you are and create a space to encourage that. It's not just community, it's organizations. We all need to do that. And you do that through listening, you do that through consultation, you do that through engagement. And you need key people in all those spaces.
Right.
You can be those active listeners.
Yes.
And feeders of information that aren't actually the leaders themselves. I mean, well, they perhaps have a smaller leadership role, but we need those people. And I feel, it's I heard a quote the other day that said, any community that started in 2020 probably is no longer worth it, because it was all just done. Oh, quick, like let's just pull a community together, because in this sort of very quick panic mode of pandemic, and I'm sure it's not entirely true, but I'm sure there's some fabulous ones out there. But it is interesting because without that, with communities, you need a great purpose statement. You need to know who you are, what you're going to do together, and what's the ultimate goal. And what actions are you going to take together? Does your community exist to learn? Is it to be accountable? Is it to, and those activities need to be designed, community activities need to be designed around those purposes and those actions. And so when you don't have any idea of what that is, it's like, let's just bring a bunch of people together and expect them to start connecting and talking. It doesn't happen. It needs to be facilitated. And so the whole show up in community is how to be that early adopter, or that supporter, or that someone who's willing to have the courage to start conversations.
And that's so important, what you just said. Community does not happen by itself. I've seen so many attempts at building community, but there was no cohesion, there was no purpose. They were going to come together and figure out what their purpose was later, and basically they fall apart. So I'm glad you speak to the fact that those are important elements and really important conversations to have from the beginning. Another thing you say that I just love, because I believe it's true, I've seen it to be true, and that is, with just a little bit of support, this will take people a long way. Just a little bit of support.
I think it absolutely, and I just saw it time and time again. There was a LinkedIn local host in Helsinki who just moved there and said, I want to do this in Helsinki. And I said, well, do you know many people locally? And she said, well, not really. And I said, well, go and do that and come back to me in 2 months' time. She came back in 2 months' time with a whole group of people and built a really fabulous community. It happened in I saw it a lot in fact, it's continuing to happen in Nigeria and a lot of French-speaking Africa, is where you get these young entrepreneurial minds who this really establishes them as a leader locally. It's tied to their personal brand, and they're building businesses around the networks that they're building with. And it didn't take much. It took one Zoom call with myself, and there were many other mentors. It wasn't just me. It just took one Zoom call and some information and an online group of people who were sharing their experiences with them. And that's all it took for a lot of people to really build these thriving communities that created a lot of impact. It didn't take a lot. It just needed the right intention, it needed the right resources, and it just needed the right support. But most importantly, it needed that belief in the individuals. And there was never, how much event experience do you have? Like, have you run events before? There was none of that. This was literally, if you're passionate, if you want to do it, in some ways, those that were really experienced with events were not great at creating LinkedIn Local events because they had to unlearn some of
so many rules around creating an event. Yes.
Yeah. There's a really beautiful book by Priya Parker called The Art of Gathering, which I think is just so important, that really runs through this if anyone is interested. It's such an incredible book around why we gather, how we gather, and for what purposes is it even meaningful to gather anymore. So yeah, it's a fascinating study.
Well, we'll include that in your program notes because, as the listeners of Women We Should Know are aware, and for those of you who are new, with every guest, our team, my great team behind me, puts their URL, whatever contact information they would like to share with you so that you can be in direct communication with them, so that you can find their books, so that you can follow their events and their website and their video trainings that are coming out. And many times a guest will offer a handful of their favorite books that inspired them to be who they are at this time. So we'll be sure and get that one from you and put it on your program notes, Anna.
Right.
Yes. So we're getting so close to the end, and I still have so much I want to know. Would you talk about your new dive, it sounds like, into the arena of bespoke film?
Well, I'm not sure that it's necessarily film. That might have been something in my bio that, look, the dive I'm going into, I guess, is more a storytelling dive. I don't think it's going to be on film though. I actually hosted a podcast this year, which was not my podcast. I was approached just to be the host of it, all around mental health in the workplace. So that was an interesting project for me. And I mean, I was very much not the expert. I was the audience proxy, as they say. So came in with not the knowledge and did all the interviews, and I really loved that. And so what I'm sort of working on is a series called A Love Letter to My Community, which is community love letters from all around the world, of people who've been impacted by a community in some way. So this sort of follows the study of how we show up in community. So these aren't necessarily, some of them will be, but community leaders. They are people who've been impacted by and all sorts of different ideas of community. Sometimes it's an annual meeting, sometimes it's an online group, sometimes it's an offline thing, sometimes it's very local specific. So I don't think that's going to be a video series. I think it's going to be, it's starting as a written one. I think it will be a podcast though, given the journey I've been on this year. I'm not the greatest video maker, or at least editor. So maybe it will be a bespoke.
Yes. I'm not either. I have to have people do that for me because, know your strengths, but more importantly, know where they aren't, so that you don't trip yourself and get yourself in a big mess. Another thing that I would love for you to speak to is this interest in partnering with a new band of what you call global warriors.
Look, I guess through my work, I try and partner and pick communities or organizations I feel that have an impact. So for example, I am an ambassador for World Values Day, which is the third Thursday in October every year. And that is, they are promoting the whole idea of values and implementing values from an individual level to an organizational level. And so I feel like that's, that tribe of people, values are really important to me. They were hugely important to the LinkedIn Local movement. I've seen what having values does to a community and then taking the values away and what that does. So I learned, that was one thing I really did learn from that experience with LinkedIn Local, was the importance of values. And so I, It's very much, yeah, exactly. Finding those warriors, or those those brave people who are willing to build communities around brave things, or have conversations. And one example of that is World Values Day, because I think it's just such an important cause that we all need some awareness raised for.
What are some of your other points of focus where you put specific points of focus, intentionality, and energy, such as World Values Day?
Look, I think someone asked me, what is it that this was a facilitation question. I participated in an online group recently, and it's like, what's one thing that you enjoy having conversations about? And I knew the answer to this almost immediately, because there is one thread that goes through everything that I do, and that is belonging. And that's, the mental health in the workplace was around belonging in a lot of organizations. The LinkedIn Local was, because what drove me so much, it was unintentionally set up as a global thing, but what drove me to continue to do it was just people that were inboxing me saying, this has completely changed my life. I've suddenly found a group of people where I feel like I belong. My daughter, when she was 7, started using the word belonging, and it was like, it's just such an interesting, I find that word fascinating. So the thread that runs through everything that I am trying to achieve, I think, in my life, is this whole idea of belonging. And where that comes from, I'm not 100% sure. I'm an only child, so I think maybe I've always been seeking some kind of belonging somewhere, and why it fascinates me. So perhaps
that company that you did not have when you
were. I don't feel I had a particularly lonely childhood at all, but that is something, that belonging and the someone pointed that out to me one day. I thought, maybe there is something in that.
I have friends who were only children who were raised with amazing parents, and they did amazing things, but there was that one little sidekick that they always felt they missed. Yes.
I don't know that I would say I missed it, but anyway, that sparked, I think, an idea of this.
Course.
And I find this whole idea fascinating. It was, how do we belong as human beings? And I think that's where my whole drive for community comes from, is how do we create those safe spaces, or how are those spaces uncreated? How in our society are we losing the whole connection that we have, and how do we bring it back? So
how would you define, for you in your personal universe, belonging?
I think that's a really tough question, for somebody who reads too much about it, probably. Look, I think it's feeling comfortable to be who you are. You have that sounding board with other people without that judgment. And I think it's just knowing who you are, and then being able to be yourself within communities, company, organizations, and finding that support. I think it's also, it was interesting, someone had said to me the other day, and I must admit I haven't stopped thinking about it. It's like, what makes you happy versus what gives you life meaning? And I feel like
that's a great juxtaposition.
Isn't it? It's like, and a lot of our decisions in our lives, and it's an idea I need to go and explore further, I think, because it was literally only said to me a few days ago. But often, what makes you happy in a moment is very different to what gives your life meaning, and it's
absolutely
that balance.
Absolutely.
And so for me, what gives my life meaning is this exploration of belonging, and being a parent. What makes me happy is usually just relaxing or gardening or reading or something. Is it going to give my life meaning? Probably not, but it makes me happy in the moment. And so you need a balance of both of those things.
Right. I'll be thinking about that for some time to come now.
I do believe there is a book, which I haven't read, but I'll send that to you after the interview, that might be around that. So,
that would be great fun. I'm far too bookish for my own timeline, I guess. Always trying to squeeze that extra paragraph in somewhere to read. If you had one thing that you wanted to say to our listeners that they could stick in their pocket and carry forward with them as they go through their day, or as far as it carries them? What would that be?
It's that everyone has an opportunity to make a difference, and that every little act, you have the opportunity to make change. I mean, I grew a global community. I was a mum of 2 toddlers in a small town in Australia, and it just took off. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was hard work. I ran with it, and I really, really dived into leading it very well. But it doesn't need to be that impactful. You don't need a story like mine. It can just be that one small act of, inviting someone in, a neighbor, getting to know them, can really create change in local areas, in local neighborhoods, and globally as well. So, we are all very interconnected, despite the way we perhaps don't always act and think. Right. But I feel like if there's one message I think that I've learned is that, we all have an opportunity to make a difference, and change the culture around us, or change the environment. And I think that's important to remember.
It is. Thank you. Thank you for coming on today. And I have learned a tremendous amount from you, and I know that our listeners have as well. And I appreciate you taking the time to come and be with us.
Thank you so much, Leslie. It's been a really great conversation. Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And as you all go forward with the rest of your day, I trust that you did get several nuggets that you'll be sticking in your pocket and pulling out to roll around and consider as you move forward, things that do make you think or do inspire you to consider in a little bit different way than what you had previously. Thank you for joining us. Anna's podcast will be launched very soon. If you are subscribed to the podcast, you will know exactly when. So if you aren't, go on there, subscribe now. And as you go forward with your day, remember, you are smarter and wiser than you have even imagined yet.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We hope you received inspiration for expanding your own social innovation and influence. Help us inspire others by sharing this episode and leaving your comments over at lesliemichaels.com/podcast. For more tips, insights, and support in creating a fully audacious, professional, and personal lifestyle you love, visit our Women We Should Know community on Facebook.